The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 20650 in the name of Miles Briggs on improving diagnosis of pre-eclampsia, and the debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Would those members who wish to speak in the debate please press the request to speak buttons, and I call on Miles Briggs to open the debate for around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank colleagues from across the Chamber who have signed my motion allowing today's debate to take place. I also want to commend a number of fellow elected representatives who have campaigned on this issue longer than I, and over a number of years, including Kenny Gibson, MSP, and Patricia Gibson, MP. I'd like to pay tribute as well and welcome the continuing good work of the charity Action on Pre-eclampsia as well for the work that they do. The condition pre-eclampsia, which most often demonstrates itself through high blood pressure, is the most common of the serious complications of pregnancy. Mild pre-eclampsia affects up to 10% of first-time pregnancies, with severe cases affecting 1 to 2 in 100 pregnancies. It's caused by a poorly functioning placenta, which joins the mother and baby and supplies the baby with nutrients and oxygen from the mother's blood. While we do not know as of yet exactly what is the root cause for pre-eclampsia, medical science is expanding our knowledge every single day. By definition, pre-eclampsia occurs after 20 weeks, but in very rare cases can occur earlier, and the majority of these cases occur in the third trimester. It's a multi-system disorder which can affect different parts of the body, including the liver, kidneys, cardiovascular system and clotting system. I've therefore decided to bring this debate to Parliament this evening to discuss the current pathways available for expectant mothers and opportunities available to improve the diagnosis and care of the condition for Scottish mothers across our country today. The current clinical pathway in Scotland for pre-eclampsia includes blood pressure and urine measurements, but both blood pressure and proteinuria are relatively poor in actually predicting its clinical onset and the progression of the condition. Indeed, it's estimated that 70% of women admitted to hospital with suspected pre-eclampsia do not actually have the condition. This, understandably, has cost implications for our NHS and puts these women and their families under significant and unnecessary stress in many cases, and the inconvenience of being hospitalised. But there's a solution, and the use of the placental growth factor testing is what I'd like to discuss today, as part of the NICE guidelines, which we've seen this put in place since 2016. In the 2019 NHS England announcement, the rollout of PIGF testing through the Rapid Uptake Programme in order to help roll out pre-eclampsia was a welcome step forward in England. The use of PIGF has been shown now to reduce demand on maternity services, improve patient safety and patient experience, reduce admissions and reduce unnecessary inpatient monitoring services. A previous trial, the Parrot trial, demonstrated that the PIGF test, alongside blood pressure and urine checks, reduced the average time to diagnosis from 4.1 days to 1.9 days compared to traditional methods of testing. It also significantly cut the rate of serious maternal complications and maternal death, with no increased risk to babies and no increase in premature deliveries or also neonatal unit admissions. As things stand, this test is not routinely available in Scotland today. And many mothers-to-be and families here in Scotland think this disparity in care between women in England and Scotland is unfair, and I agree and share those concerns. The Scottish Government's position to date, and I hope the Minister will clarify this during debate, is that ministers want to wait until the results of the second trial, Parrot 2, are known before adopting the routine PIGF tests here in Scotland. However, this trial may take now up to 5 years to actually report, and there's already strong clinical evidence to recommend its use, and it's supported now by national clinical guidelines, including NICE DG 23. The latter states that the test used with standard clinical assessment is recommended to help rule out pre-eclampsia in women presenting with suspected pre-eclampsia between 20 weeks and 34 weeks plus 6 days of gestation. Furthermore, the Parrot 2 test, which we all see and which ministers have said they want to wait to look at, will only be really looking at the effectiveness of repeat PIGF testing when no testing is actually taking place here in Scotland. So I don't think it's going to add the value ministers have suggested they're waiting to see. What I and campaigners want to emphasise is that this test is a powerful tool in ruling out pre-eclampsia. It's not a certain diagnosis of the condition at all, but the tests are highly accurate, ruling out the chances of a woman developing pre-eclampsia and requiring delivery in the next 14 days. Care can therefore be targeted and unnecessary admissions reduced, whilst women who are at greater risk can receive the appropriate surveillance to reduce any possible complications. NICE's economic evaluation also suggests a potential cost reduction of between £2,488 and £2,896 per patient compared with current standard clinical assessment, depending on the test used per patient. The potential saving and reinvestment for the NHS is therefore significant. Deputy Presiding Officer, to conclude, I believe strongly that mums-to-be here in Scotland who may be at risk of pre-eclampsia need as much support as possible and should be able to access the best possible ways of ruling out the condition. PIGF testing is working, is highly successful in England and is helping many pregnant women while reducing the pressures and costs on the English NHS. It's unacceptable that today pregnant women in Scotland cannot access these tests routinely, and there appears to be no clear pathway now in identifying the adoption here in Scotland. I hope today's debate presents an opportunity for ministers to consider the success of the testing elsewhere and the clear NICE guidelines which are now in place, that they will agree to review their current position and introduce these tests so that women in Scotland can have the same level of treatment as those in England. Anything else I don't think would be acceptable, and I move the motion in my name. Thank you.
We'll now move to the open debate. The speeches of around 4 minutes, please. Kenneth Gibson, followed by Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to congratulate Miles Briggs for securing this debate and indeed his kind words at the commencement of it. And as I proceed through my speech, Miles will find out that I will be agreeing with him completely on what he has said in his own speech today. I'd also like to thank Action on Pre-eclampsia for their campaign to secure adoption of central growth factor testing here in Scotland. And this is a matter that Patricia Gibson MP has also actively pursued at Westminster and in meetings with the Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Health. The blood test has been proven to improve patient safety and experience through faster and accurate diagnosis, easing anxiety in hospital admissions, reduce unnecessary inpatient monitoring tests and demand on maternity services, and could potentially decrease admissions for suspected pre-eclampsia in lower risk women. An economic evaluation performed by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence showed a potential cost reduction of between £2,488 and £2,896 per patient compared with standard clinical assessment. As a result, in England the test has become almost routine, as we have heard. With pre-eclampsia affecting around 6% of pregnancies, it is necessary to have proactive testing and appropriate treatment integrated into our maternity healthcare system. Pre-eclampsia can lead to serious injury and even death of both baby and mother. In 30% of cases where a mother suffers from a severe form called HELP syndrome, the mother loses her life. My wife Patricia and I endured our own personal nightmare with NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, when the entirely preventable loss of our son at full term occurred due to a failure to diagnose pre-eclampsia in Patricia, who was 41 years old at the time with her first baby and therefore known to be increased risk. Patricia nearly lost her life too and spent 19 days in intensive care and high dependency after her liver ruptured. We sought only an apology and an assurance that steps would be taken to ensure such a circumstance did not happen to anyone else. This was fought tooth and nail by Greater Glasgow and Clyde's lawyers, no doubt at great public expense, for 7 years. Health boards surely have a duty of care to patients and their families in such circumstances, and the sad truth is that pre-eclampsia is not always diagnosed properly or treated effectively. When it does occur, the patient, her child and family should be treated appropriately and with respect. The 2020 programme for government commits to establishing a women's health plan, and on 18 September I asked the Health Secretary when the Women's Health Group would be convened and if it would prioritise the diagnosis of pre-eclampsia. The response was positive. Apart from the obvious fact that pre-eclampsia only happens to women, we must look at economic inequalities based on living in deprived areas, a high risk factor for many of my own constituents. Inequalities also exist in some ethnic minorities and age, with women aged 40 and older more likely to suffer from pre-eclampsia. A family history of the condition can also play a part. The Health Secretary assured me a group would be convened shortly and the testing for and treatment of the condition be prioritised in its work plan. With several months having since elapsed, I would appreciate an update from the Minister as to what steps have been taken by the Women's Health Team to improve the diagnosis, prevention and treatment of pre-eclampsia so far. And I understand, as Miles Briggs discussed, that it was decided to wait for the outcome until the so-called Parrot-2 research into repeat testing. But NICE guidance does not suggest further evidence is needed before routine adoption of the placental growth factor testing. It seems to me that this is only going to kick things further down the road and delay the day when Scottish women can benefit from this test as women south of the border can. I welcome the Scottish Government funding towards the maternal, newborn and infant clinical outcome review programme run by Embrace UK, Mothers and Babies Reducing Risk Through Audits and Confidential Inquiries across the UK. But, Presiding Officer, we must ensure that women are aware of how to reduce risk factors such as obesity, smoking and drinking in pregnancy, where it's associated with an increased risk of serious adverse outcomes, including miscarriage, birth defects, thromboembolism, gestational diabetes, postpartum hemorrhage, dysfunctional labour, wound infections, stillbirth and indeed pre-eclampsia. We must help mothers minimise such factors wherever possible.
Brian Whittle, followed by Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Firstly, can I remind the Chamber that one of my daughters is a midwife in the Scottish NHS, and I can also thank my colleague Miles Briggs for bringing this debate to the Chamber. Pre-eclampsia is a condition I really became aware of through a constituent of mine, Fraser Morton, who first came to my surgery early in my political career after he and his partner had quite recently lost a son in childbirth. An unimaginable situation for all of us to try and contemplate. However, through his consistent campaigning, he has changed things for the better for parents since that tragedy, and he continues to push for more change. Now, I know that during his partner's later stages of a pregnancy, pre-eclampsia was a condition that she suffered with, or to be more accurate, Deputy Presiding Officer, the misdiagnosis of June's condition was eventually accepted as a major contributory factor in the death of their son. I have to say, listening to Kenny Gibson there, which I thought fantastic to be able to come into this chamber and speak as he did of that kind of tragedy. I think the fact that Kenny Gibson experienced and his in particular experience in fighting for change, I hear that echoed in Mr Mawson's experience. I think that should all make us stand up and take note that when tragedies such as this occur, we always say we need to learn from these occurrences, and we want to create a system where we learn from these occurrences. And listening to Kenny Gibson and knowing what happened, what Mr Wharton went through, we have a long way to go before the system allows that to happen. I think in Mr Morton's case, it is a death that should not have happened. And it's that in real stark terms, Deputy Presiding Officer, is what we are discussing today. Preventing parents from having to go through that unimaginable trauma of losing a child in childbirth or in later stages of pregnancy. And I wanted to raise the issue of CTG scanning, or the misreading of CTG scans, because that is such a major contributor to baby deaths. And through Mr Morton's considerable efforts, it's now mandatory for all neonatal staff to undergo CTG scan training twice a year. And let me tell you, Deputy Presiding Officer, as I've already said, it was quite a journey. We had to lobby 2 Cabinet Health Secretaries, sit in front of the Health Improvement Scotland Board, Ayrshire and Health Board, to eventually effect the change that would address an obvious weak spot in the system. And the reason I tell that story and the ongoing efforts of Mr Morton is to highlight that by raising these issues in this place, we can make a change. Changes that can save the lives of children at the start of their lives, that can save the pain and trauma of losing a son or a daughter. In Miles Briggs' motion, he calls for placental growth factor testing to be routinely available to tackle the issue of misdiagnosing of pre-eclampsia and the serious ramifications of that misdiagnosis. I think the reality is that Scotland's pregnant women are being denied a PIGF test, and following Parrot's study and the publication of NICE guidelines, it recommended that PIGF testing should be adopted, and it has been in England. And as Miles Briggs said in his opening speech, it leads to reduced demand in maternity services, improved patient safety through a more accurate and faster diagnosis, potential to reduce admissions and reduce anxiety. But most importantly, using this test alongside blood pressure and urine test can cut the rate of serious maternal complications before birth, such as pre-eclampsia, stroke and maternal death. Deputy Presiding Officer, I think the Scottish Government quite rightly look for an evidence-based approach to policy. What I would say to the Scottish Government that there is the evidence here is pretty solid, that by introducing this test alongside other changes like CTG scan training, it is possible to reduce mortality in childbirth for both parent and child. It should not take someone like Mr Morton to force this kind of change. This test should be available in Scotland, and I ask the Scottish Government to make that change. Deputy Presiding Officer.
The last of the open debate speakers is Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to join colleagues in thanking Miles Briggs for bringing this motion to the Chamber this evening. And like colleagues, I'm heartened that many members have been here for the debate but have been raising parliamentary questions. I know that Alex Cole-Hamilton has done so, and of course Kenny Gibson has been I don't have the words for Kenny Gibson right now, but both him and Patricia Gibson have been so courageous and relentless in their campaigning, and I think we all admire you know, how much they've put into this, because even if you haven't gone through it, I think we all understand that pre-eclampsia is frightening, and it is a life-threatening condition for too many pregnant women and their babies. And I'd like to thank Action on Pre-eclampsia for their helpful briefing, but also for all the support they provide to families and all their campaigning work over the decades. Miles Briggs' motion is very straightforward. He's highlighting a glaring inequality where women and their babies over the border in England can get these tests, which are well evidenced. The benefits are clear, but women and their babies here in Scotland don't have that benefit. I understand that the tests are not that expensive. I think it's possibly below £100. So I hope by the time we get to the end of this debate, we can find a way forward, because I don't really see why we need to do further research. And I think Kenneth Gibson is right. You know, it's really welcome that we have a focus on women's health, and the Scottish Government has done some really positive work, but we need to, bring that work forward. I think, like others have done, I want to genuinely pay tribute to Kenneth and Patricia Gibson for speaking out about the loss of their own baby son, Kenneth. That's not easy to do, and I know that by speaking out about their experience and their loss, they will have helped not just people in their own constituencies, but thousands of people across Scotland and beyond. So it is really important when we bring those personal stories into the Chamber. I don't think there's an awful lot more we can add to this, Presiding Officer, because it seems to me it is really, really simple. And I know right now ministers have a lot of issues on their desks that are really complicated and do need perhaps more research and investment. But this is a solution there. It's on the shelf. It's ready-made. We can learn from colleagues elsewhere. I didn't know an awful lot about this, I have to admit, so I'm grateful to Miles Briggs for bringing this forward, because these debates do raise awareness. But I did read the articles in the Sunday Post last year where a number of professionals were quoted, but also reading about the family impact and the trauma that can live with families for many, many years. And again, I would pay tribute to Fraser Morton, like Brian Whittle has done so. So I hope that this genuinely is an issue where we can all agree. It is a short debate, but it's one of these issues where we don't have to reinvent the wheel. There is a solution. I would welcome hearing from the Minister that he will take on board what Kenneth Gibson and Patricia Gibson have said. Miles Briggs' motion, there's nothing, not a word in there you can criticise, and I think Action on Pre-eclampsia have been very, very clear. If we do need to have further trials in Scotland, how long will that take? And if it is an issue about resource, is that something that ministers are looking at? But this is an issue that I think we can all agree on. It would be a really positive outcome if we could get some update from ministers that this work will go ahead, and these tests will be available to women and babies in Scotland very, very soon. Thank you.
I now call Joe Fitzpatrick to respond to the debate for around 7 minutes. Please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I say thanks to Miles Briggs for securing this important debate. I think we are in agreement that it is essential for pre-eclampsia to be diagnosed and treated as soon as possible. Every maternity health professional in Scotland is trained to recognise the signs and symptoms of pre-eclampsia in their patients. They're also trained in how to manage the condition effectively so women across Scotland receive the highest quality care tailored to their need. I'm going to just touch on the points that Brian Whittle made in terms of learning lessons from adverse events. And it is hugely important that we learn from adverse outcomes in the maternity setting, and that we're clear that systematic, multidisciplinary, high-quality reviews into deaths in maternity settings are hugely important. That's why we commissioned the development of the perinatal mortality review tool, and the tool supports healthcare professionals to undertake robust reviews. These reviews highlight learnings so that boards can continue to improve outcomes for women and their families in their area. All health boards in Scotland are registered to use the perinatal mortality review tool. We know that the UK has the lowest incidence of maternal mortality for pre-eclampsia in the world. Less than one woman in every million who gives birth now dies from pre-eclampsia. This is testament to the skills and knowledge and dedication of the incredible staff in our NHS in Scotland and elsewhere in the UK. The latest Embrace UK Saving Lives, Improving Mothers Care report was published in December last year, and that tells that, thankfully, pre-eclampsia accounted for just 2% of all maternal deaths. 5 deaths between 2015 and 2017 across the UK as a whole. But it is important that we always remember that the huge impact on that loss. And again, I'd to thank Kenneth Gibson for speaking out today and sharing his and his wife's personal experience. Around 50,000 babies are born each year in our NHS in Scotland. We know that hypertensive disorders, including pre-eclampsia, affect around 8 to 10% of pregnant women. Health boards around Scotland also return information to NHS Information Services Division on the number of babies delivered by mothers with pre-eclampsia. And in Scotland, in 2019, less than 1.5% of babies reported to ISD were delivered because of pre-eclampsia. And that's been the case in each of the last 5 years. And illustrates the impact and importance of the great work to date across maternity services in Scotland delivered by our excellent NHS care staff. But it really is important that we remember the individual impact on that, and that we are not complacent. We continue to look at what more we can do to make sure that Scotland is a fantastic place for women to give birth and start their families. I guess there's been some talk across the chamber about access to the... Sorry, I'm going to come to that in a minute, actually. First of all, I want to cover, kind of minding time, Miles Briggs talked about the parrot test, and the results of the parrot test, the placental growth factor to assess and diagnose hypertensive pregnant women, was a stepped wedge trial into placental growth factor testings, and it was, as we've heard, encouraging. It suggested that testing could reduce the time taken for doctors to diagnose pre-eclampsia. However, they looked only at that single testing, and negative results using this test are only valid for 14 days. So further research is needed to ensure that we are acting on robust evidence in the best interest of patients and their families. And Monica asked about, how that testing would go forward, and in Scotland is participating in that work directly. So NHS Lothian is taking part in Parrot 2, so that independent study into research in placental growth factor testing. So for the women involved in that area, then Parrot is available here. I think. Mr. Whittle.
Brian Whittle.
I can thank the Minister for taking an intervention. I mean, NICE guidelines are pretty clear. So I think I'd have to ask, Minister, what is it about the NICE guidelines that you disagree with?
I was just about to come on to the NICE guidelines. So recognise that placental growth factor testing shows promise in improving the detection and diagnosis of pre-eclampsia, and it's vital that we ensure that any such testing is robust and evidence-based. So the NICE diagnostic guidelines takes the view that there is currently insufficient evidence to recommend the routine adoption of placental growth factor testing. That's the guidelines as it stands just now. There's been some talk suggesting that there's an inequality between Scotland and the rest of the UK, and as I've said already, there is the parrot test is happening in Lothian. and this suggestion that there's universal access to the test in other parts of the UK, and that is not, as we understand it, the fact. By the end of last year, we're aware of only 33 out of 223 trusts in England that have implemented the testing. But back to Scotland, and Kenneth Gibson, again, I can't thank Kenneth Gibson enough for the work that he has put into this, because it's never easy, because these things always bring back memories, but his personal experience and that of his wife is very, very powerful. So the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport and I met with Patricia Gibson MP in September of last year, and we explained that we are committed to developing a women's health plan in our programme for government, launched on 3rd of September last year. The expert women's health group met for the first time on the 5th of February this year, and testing for pre-eclampsia will be part of the group's work plan. So that was agreed then, and they'll consider recent and emerging evidence as part of that work. So the Women's Health Group is scheduled to meet again in May, and placental growth factor testing is confirmed as an agenda item for that meeting. So it is absolutely on the agenda. It's on the agenda for the very next meeting. My official spoke with the CEO of Action on Pre-eclampsia at the end of August last year, and it was really positive to hear about the charity's great work in maintaining public awareness of pre-eclampsia. We know that Action on Pre-eclampsia are also running training events for professionals, and I'm delighted to hear that a study day event is scheduled in Scotland for the 11th of March, so just next week, I guess. So we are continuing to look at the evidence. We're continuing to work with officials. Our officials are continuing to engage with officials in NHS England on placental growth factor testing to really understand the emerging evidence from the experience in those 33 trusts where it has been rolled out. Obviously, the majority of boards south of the border have not yet rolled out either, but I think the assurance that I can give to the Chamber is that this is very much on the Scottish Government's agenda, and I look forward to being able to report back on the output from the Women's Health Group as we move forward. Thank you.
That concludes the debate, and this meeting is closed.